This system of air currents confined to the Earth's poles is vital to balancing the planet's climate. Could this be the year the polar vortex spins out of control and causes extreme weather events? What reasons do we have to think so? Although it may not seem like it, the polar vortex located at the North Pole can influence the climate of cities as far away as New York or Los Angeles, California. So even if the polar vortices are hundreds of kilometers from your house, they can be the difference between going out on the street in a light coat and going out with a shovel to remove the snow from the door. But what would happen if these polar vortices got out of control? Could they pose a risk to humanity? Join us to find out. The polar vortex is a huge mass of cold, low-pressure air constantly rotating over Earth's polar regions. It is a key atmospheric phenomenon that regulates the global climate and separates the cold temperatures of the Arctic and Antarctica from the more temperate latitudes. In the northern hemisphere, it rotates counterclockwise, while in the southern hemisphere, it rotates clockwise. What would happen if this gigantic whirlpool of air did not exist? Would the Earth have well-defined seasons? Would we live in constant climate chaos? This system is not a simple set of cold winds at the poles, it's a natural barrier that confines Arctic air within its region. But like any barrier, it can be weakened. When the polar vortex is stable, the cold remains trapped in the north, maintaining predictable winters in other parts of the world. However, when it fragments or weakens, the frigid air escapes to lower latitudes, triggering extreme weather events. Can you imagine a tropical city with snow on the streets? Although this may seem implausible, it has happened in places where winter is usually mild. The relationship between the polar vortex and the jet stream is crucial to understanding its impact. The jet stream is a rapidly rotating current in the upper atmosphere that separates cold air from warm air in the south. It maintains an orderly and predictable pattern when the polar vortex is strong. However, if the vortex weakens, the jet stream becomes erratic, forming large ripples that allow icy air to enter regions where it shouldn't. Think about this: what if an unexpected winter hits a place without the proper infrastructure for extreme cold? Would we be prepared to survive without heating, with frozen pipes and impassable roads? But it's not all extreme cold. Interestingly, when the polar vortex weakens, warm air from the equator can move toward the Arctic, causing unusual warming in the region. This means that the polar vortex not only brings winter storms to temperate locations but also accelerates the melting of polar ice, which has serious consequences for sea levels. Could this phenomenon be behind today's unpredictable weather? Is it possible that the polar vortex is changing and sending us warning signals? The polar vortex is not an abstract or distant concept, but a key part of our planet's climate system. It is so powerful that it can decide whether a winter will be mild or devastating. But we really need to ask ourselves, will it continue to behave in the same way in the future, or are we seeing the start of a new climate era? How has the polar vortex influenced different weather events in recent years? While often invisible to the human eye, the polar vortex has caused many extreme weather events. In 2021, for example, its weakening caused a historic cold snap that impacted Europe, Asia, and North America. Madrid, a city accustomed to moderate winters, was paralyzed by Storm Filomena, which left a record snowfall of up to 50 centimeters. Can you imagine living in a city unprepared for massive snowfall, where the streets become ice rinks and mobility grinds to a halt? The impact of the polar vortex is not limited to the northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, alterations in the southern polar vortex have led to frigid winters in parts of Australia. At the same time, South Africa has faced torrential rains and droughts at unexpected intervals. How prepared are countries to face extreme weather that defies their historical patterns? The polar vortex has caused unforgettable events in North America. In 2019, a cold snap dubbed the polar vortex froze Chicago, bringing temperatures to -30 degrees Celsius. In that same year, the northeastern United States faced a bomb cyclone, an explosive storm that dumped heavy snowfall and knocked out power to millions. Interestingly, the polar vortex also contributes to heat waves. When it allows cold air to descend to lower latitudes, warm air from the equator can move toward the Arctic, rapidly warming that region and accelerating ice melt. The polar vortex reminds us that the climate does not follow strict rules and that seemingly local events are manifestations of an interconnected global system. The polar vortex is not only a meteorological phenomenon of the present, its influence has left its mark on Earth's history. From modern winter storms to climate changes that redefined human evolution, its impact exceeds what we imagine. Two events in particular show how the collapse or alteration of the polar vortex can change the course of history. In February 2021, an Arctic air mass unexpectedly descended to the southern United States, bringing temperatures as low as -8 degrees Celsius in Texas. A state accustomed to warm weather, its infrastructure, designed to withstand scorching summers, collapsed in the face of extreme cold. Pipes froze, roads became impassable, and more than 4 million people were left without electricity or heat for days. Around 12,900 years ago, the planet was emerging from the last ice age when, suddenly, temperatures dropped dramatically within decades. The Younger Dryas event plunged much of the northern hemisphere into extreme cold for more than 1,000 years. The leading cause is thought to have been the disruption of ocean currents caused by massive melting Arctic ice, which completely altered atmospheric circulation and collapsed the polar vortex. Could something similar happen again? Are we altering the balance of the polar vortex in a way that could lead to a new extreme weather event? Climate change is rewriting the rules of atmospheric behavior, and the polar vortex is no exception. One of the most worrying phenomena is Arctic amplification, a process where the Arctic is warming faster than any other region. This uneven warming reduces the temperature difference between the Arctic and mid-latitudes, weakening the polar vortex and making it more prone to fracturing. An unstable polar vortex can lead to more extreme winters in temperate regions, with cold snaps paralyzing entire cities. When extreme events become more common, our current infrastructure might not be enough to withstand the impact. Think about how our cities would react to historic snowfall, massive flooding, or unusually hot summers. Are we designing a resilient future, or simply reacting to every disaster? The polar vortex is a crucial element of Earth's climate system, but its progressive weakening raises unsettling questions about the future. Although a total collapse of the polar vortex is unlikely, its destabilization could trigger deep and prolonged climate changes. The global climate becomes more extreme and unpredictable when the polar vortex fractures. If the polar vortex continues to weaken, it could alter atmospheric patterns in the long term, affecting the circulation of the jet stream and the weather systems that depend on it. The polar vortex reminds us that Earth's climate is interconnected, fragile, and ever-changing. But the big question is, are we paying enough attention to these warning signs? What kind of world will future generations inherit if the polar vortex weakens? What can we do today to avoid tomorrow's worst-case scenarios? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.